Hey there, YouTube. Had another question in the comments section regarding my rotation and kind of my grazing management, I believe, and wanted to address that and talk a little bit about how I keep track of that and manage these goats and their grazing. The short answer is generally my moves are roughly every 7 to 14 days. For the size of area that I'm covering, the amount of temporary fence that I'll build for one move, the biggest thing would be my water availability, because I'm basically dependent completely on surface water or hauled water. I don't have any pressurized piped water on the place at this moment. So that really limits me as far as where I can build a paddock. Obviously have to have water in it. So working a little bit on developing a little better system for hauled water, even though I don't want to depend on that or make that a large part or regular part of my rotation. But I think I can achieve some efficiencies there and maybe utilize that more and create a little bit more subdivision on the place that way. But like I say, to answer the question, about every 7 to 14 days is my general rotation. For those paddocks, I get to use usually one or two sides of my paddock will be some permanent fence. If it is goat tight, as I like to call it, sometimes even those permanent fences, I have to put poly wire in front of them, offset from them, because they're really old. These are some of the fences on the place are 60-year-old type fences, old net wire that you can snap it with your hand and break it off. So and it's riddled with holes from wildlife running through it. But for most of those paddocks, I'm looking at anywhere from half to 3/4 a mile of temporary fence that I have to build. So that's the 2-strand poly wire fences that I put up with a step-in post. Usually I'm able to build a 1/4 mile of temporary fence in about an hour is what it takes me on average, with the topography and the brush that we have to go around. And so when I build these paddocks, generally the size of my paddock, it actually varies quite a bit depending on the type of land I'm in, which is common among a lot of grazing systems that you see out there on native country as opposed to improved pastures. I have one pasture that is the majority of it is a creek or a drainage area. So with that, in my part of the world, if you have a draw or drainage area, it's going to be composed of a lot of woody species along those banks and everything. So bushes, a lot of feed for a goat basically is what it amounts to. So the goat forage per acre is very dense in that type of pasture, versus some pastures that we have that are higher elevation, that are very open, that are much more grass, where I'm just depending on basically forbs or weeds, and then whatever grass content those goats are going to consume to provide forage for those goats. So kind of a less goat feed dense type pasture. So with that said, most of my paddocks vary from as small as maybe 12 to 15 acres up to, I have one paddock that due to difficulty of fencing, it's 65 or 70 acres. So I think that's the biggest paddock that I have right now in my rotation with the way it works out. So basically those are my biggest constraints, are, like I said before, water, and then difficulty of fencing. Some areas, the biggest thing that prevents you from fencing an area is the topography. Um, Very steep creek banks, that are almost kind of like a cliff, are difficult to fence over. And obviously, the more ups and downs you have, the more work it becomes. And zigzagging through thick stands of brush creates more work. So, it's a pick the lowest hanging fruit situation. I look for places that are easy to fence, and obviously they have to have water in order to make it viable. So I have a lot of variance in my pasture size, and that makes it more difficult to manage. But that's the situation that I'm in. So I hope that answers some of the questions on my grazing management. I'm trying to think what else might be a component to that. Um, I guess obviously growing season versus non-growing season changes it a little bit. The idea is obviously to go faster during the growing season, to take less so that it can regrow and regenerate during that growing season. I hate to say it, but that doesn't always happen. For instance, I do spring kidding. So during the kidding season, and for me, kidding season means basically from the very start of kidding for about the first 6 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks maybe, ideally 6 weeks. I will not make actual pasture moves during that time. I will simply take the back fence down. So essentially my paddock will get bigger and bigger and bigger during that time period, because kid goats don't move worth a flip. Um, when a nanny has a set of kids, she usually finds a little secluded area to have them. So if you're trying to move your goat herd during that time period, chances are good that you're not even going to find those kids, let alone get them moved. And even the kids that are, a week or 10 days old, they don't follow well. They're not going to cover big distances very well. Not that you're going to, and when I say big distance, I'm talking even about, 100 yards. They're not going to herd, all those kinds of things. So it's very difficult to move goats during that time period. So that's a time where my grazing management changes. And like I say, I just simply take a back fence down, and that paddock gets bigger until I feel like that goat herd is where I can effectively move it. And that's a lot of the planning process right there, is being in a place where you can do that. You have to think out in front of you. Okay, March 21st, let's say, is my beginning date of kidding. I need to be in a place where for the next 6 weeks, I can just take a back fence down and make my paddock bigger, and not have a problem. Along with, having some sort of shelter. For me, that's thick stands of brush for those goats to get into if we have a spring type storm, and lots of cover for those nannies to kid in. So that's all part of the planning process for grazing, as well as, okay, when you get to the end of that 6 weeks, you don't want to have to make a big trail drive with those goats to go to your next pasture. You want to be able to have, the shortest drive possible in order to move those kid goats onto that fresh ground. And so that's all part of the planning process, along with, for my situation, I've got a cow herd to contend with. They're on kind of a Unfortunately, they're on kind of a continuous grazing situation, so the cows are spread out across the entire place, which can make it more difficult. But once again, that's just the situation that I have and I've been dealt with. Like I've told people before in my videos, and I'll say now. My grazing situation is I don't own the cattle, I don't manage the cattle. I graze my goats on top of a cow-calf operator on some leased ground. So there's a lot of things I don't have control over in my grazing management. And simply, I was somebody without a land base, and try to find an opportunity. So my situation is different than probably what a lot of people have to deal with if they own the land or they have the entire lease on the land that they're grazing on. So a really huge fundamental difference in management and you know, your daily operating situations. So on top of the cow-calf, we have deer hunters on the place, which isn't a big issue during kidding season, but like for instance, breeding season coincides with deer season here, so we have deer hunters running around. I don't have to make too many concessions to them, but I do have a lot of deer feeders to deal with. So goats getting in deer feeders is an issue. Luckily, the deer hunters on my lease have been fairly cooperative, and we've worked out a situation where usually I'll turn the deer feeders off when the goats are grazing, you know, on top of a particular feeder. A lot of them are battery powered, solar powered, you know, with a battery on them that runs the feeder. So I just unhook the battery, turn the feeder off for the time being, and that alleviates a lot of the problems. So those are all the things that I contend with in my grazing management with the way things are right now. I think that's probably enough for now on our grazing management and how we contend with our different challenges that we have on the property that we manage. So hopefully that answered a lot of the questions. If you have more specific ones, certainly feel free to ask, put them in the comments, and we'll address those as we go forward. And really enjoy sharing this information with everybody out there. Like I say all the time, I hope it helps someone. And I enjoy making these videos and look forward to the next one. So you guys take care, and we'll talk to you in the next one. Bye now.